Are we getting ready to see some kind of accountability, some kind of something against J.P. Miller? Well, he's back in the headlines, and we're going to talk about it in today's video.
Hey, 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 welcome to the Sofa Squad, sipping from the cup at hey, hey.
Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. I don't know if there's a sofa back there because it's a green screen, but I know Paul's right here. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul. If you are not new to the sofa, if you are new to the sofa, my name is Paul. Okay, either way, you're at the sofa. My name's Paul. Okay. So what we're doing today is we are going to be talking about J.P. Miller. So let's just go ahead and jump on into it, okay? Now, it's hard to believe that it's been nearly a year since Mica Miller tragically passed away in Lumber River State Park. It's really not too far away from me here in North Carolina. So since the investigation into her death by Robeson County Sheriff's Office concluded really almost as quickly as it began, Mica's ex-husband, Pastor, okay, I'm using major quotes there, John Paul, JP as we'll refer to him, Miller, he can't seem to keep himself out of breaking news headlines. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar with the case, on April 27th, 2024, emergency dispatchers in Robeson County received a call from a woman alleged to be Mica Miller, okay, asking if her location could be traced because she was about to commit, let's just say, like the final act of self-harm. Now, soon after, a kayaker would report finding a dead body in the area where he'd been fishing. Now, in less than 24 hours, stories of JP's predatory and abusive nature, these were dominating the headlines. And while a nation mourned the tragic loss of Mica, JP quickly became South Carolina's most loathed and investigative sleazebag, okay? Now, that's a title that was previously held by Alec Murdoch, okay? Let's just, give credit where credit's due, for 3 consecutive years. I don't have the bandwidth to talk about JP's decades of wrongdoings that have come to light in this last year. Okay, so let's just say that. But in today's video, we will focus on the most recent filings, which also name his father, Reginald Wayne Miller, as a co-defendant. Now, when it comes to these two, let's just say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So let's dive in and let's see what transgressions this dastardly duo allegedly committed. The Millers each claimed to be devout men of faith committed to spreading God's word and training future church leaders. However, their actions tell a much more sinister story of men who hid behind a veneer of religiosity, wielding their powerful positions as a means of concealment to manipulate and exploit vulnerable victims while engaging in SA and predatory conduct, often targeting minors. Miller Sr. founded Cathedral Baptist Church of Grandstand Incorporated, together with several other sacred and educational institutions. JP would later take over his religious empire. Abuse flourished within these entities because they lacked adequate protections for minors. Now, before continuing with the filing, I want to quickly explain one thing. Upon information and belief is a phrase used several times in the document. This is not the one we've seen before or the one that we've seen in a while. I don't remember. This is used as a qualifier indicating the person who is making the statement is not asserting first-hand knowledge of the facts, but it is what they've been told and believed to be accurate. Okay, so vocabulary lesson over. Back to the allegations, So upon information and belief, their ruse as men of faith has shielded them from law enforcement scrutiny, allowing their misconduct to continue unchecked. Upon information and belief, their religious empire was not created to only serve God, but to further Miller and John Paul Miller's predatory behavior. Upon information and belief, this was not accidental. It was part of a calculated plan to groom victims while simultaneously gaining the community's trust and financial support. Always follow the money. Upon information and belief, JP's deeply troubled relationship with Mica exemplified the power and control he exercised over women in the church. So on February 25th, 2025, Jane Doe No. 1 formally accused JP Miller of 2 counts of SA, with the first occurring back in 1998 when she was only 15 years old, and the second was in 2023. Now, when the first incident occurred, JP Miller was like a 19-year-old adult male, He was employed as a youth leader and musician at his father's megachurch. His father, head pastor, church leadership, and members knew him to be troubled and were well aware of his history of reckless behavior. Now, this included prior legal troubles, a child born out of wedlock, and a pattern of misconduct. So despite knowing about this pattern of behavior, behavior, leadership took like 0 steps to limit his access to minors or monitor his on-campus behavior. So Jane Doe number 1 stayed with her grandparents in Myrtle Beach every summer, okay? Now, in her claim, she detailed the life-changing day that she came face to face with the devil himself, okay, JP. She just walked her grandmother to her Sunday school class before making her way over to the building where her grandfather's class was meeting. Now, realizing that she was going to be like walking in late and interrupting class, Jane Doe number 1 decided to wait for them both in the sanctuary. So JP Miller was playing the piano and another band member was practicing guitar. So when Miller saw her, he started like conversating and all this kind of stuff. She excuses herself at some point and she walks to the restroom. Now, when leaving, she noticed JP standing near his father's office. He called her name and proceeded to engage in more conversation. Then he suddenly forced her into the office, shuts the door, and became aggressively physically overpowering and forcing her against the wall. Now, despite struggling trying to escape his grasp, begging him to stop, he ignored her and then led Jane Doe number 1 down the hall into a door, and the door opened to an outside like parking lot area. He forces her into her truck, and this is where he would officially SA her, okay? Now, after 25 years have passed, Jane Doe number 1 out with a friend, whatever, and they encounter the monster once more. Now, indifferent to the public setting, he leaned in as if he was like gonna hug her, puts his hands down her pants and gropes her. Now, you can imagine, she immediately recoils, moves his hand, and out of fear, she tried to like brush it off, right? Now, soon after, the two get into like this verbal confrontation, this verbal altercation with each other, right? So in where she expressed disgust about obviously the way he like uses scriptures, his title of pastor to rationalize his essay, and he responded by saying, "No man is without sin and temptation, okay? God understands that." Major eye roll here, okay? Can't roll my eyes hard enough with that one. Now, it probably comes as a little to surprise to you that when I tell you that 8 days after Jane Doe number 1 came forward, guess what? Okay, a second woman did as well. Jane Doe number 2 was 14 and Miller was 20 when the SA, both SA and psychological abuse began. Now, she had been like newly enrolled at the Cathedral Hall Academy. This is like a private Christian school in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And it promised like a faith-based education and a nurturing environment. Okay, like honestly, y'all, I can't roll my eyes hard enough at some of this stuff. Now, the suit contends that Cathedral Hall Academy wasn't a school. It was a trap, okay? There were no certified teachers, there's no legitimate coursework, there's no structured academics, and the offense there occurred in 1999. So one morning after the chapel service, she was asked to hold the door for students as they left the church building. Now, after the last student exited, she's like all alone with John Paul. I think he was like playing the piano, and he asked, you know, like, "Hey, would you like a turn?" And like, she's a trusting teenager at this point, like, why wouldn't you be, right? So she didn't see a reason to say no. So when she turned to leave, he pulled her in for a hug. Does it sound familiar? And then before she could react, y'all, his hands were like under her clothing, groping her bare areas. Okay, it was bad. Now, after the assault, she tells a teacher. Now, do you think that she received any sort of help? No. Guess what? She was sent to Miller Sr.'s office. And when she gets there, guess who's there? The father and son are standing side by side. Can you imagine? Now, Wayne Miller asked what happened, and with a trembling voice, she repeated the story. And when she finished, JP's father yelled, "You will not lie about my son." And literally, y'all, like a scene from a dystopian novel, she was forced to endure unrelenting retribution, which you can only imagine escalated over time, okay? It began with like the age-old punishment many of us suffered through back in the day, writing sentences. And in this instance, Jane Doe number 2 had to write, "I will not lie about John Paul Miller," y'all, 5,000 times, okay? As if the victim shaming wasn't enough, her having to endure the Millers was not enough. It soon spilled over into the student body, okay? They humiliated her daily by calling her a liar, a whore, and a slut, okay, a slut. Now, they would whisper behind her back, they would shove notes under her desk, and once they tired of this like preschool warfare, okay, their abuse became physical. So then J. Doe number 2 recalls how both boys and girls pushed her into bathroom stalls, slapped her, yanked her hair. One student even like held her down and sprayed bug spray at her mouth, okay? Eyes, the whole 9 yards, while all these other people watched. Now, another time, 2 students in the presence of JP wielded their own form of what I consider to be predatory behavior. She recounted a time after JP's music class when 2 girls grabbed her from behind, one held her arms back while the other ripped her shirt open and stuffed tissues into her bra. Now, Mr. Miller apparently stood by idly, laughing, just, whatever. And through this vicious behavior, JP watches, he smirks, he encouraged the students, like father, like son. So Miller Sr. comes upon Jane Doe number 2. She's crying and shouted, "Stop disturbing the Lord's work and repent for your lies." From that point on, she knew 2 things to be like the absolute truth, right? Nobody was going to protect her, and nothing was ever going to change at Cathedral Hall Academy, okay? So after one class one day during her 9th grade year, JP keeps her back a minute and told her, "You failed the test. If you stay after class for extra help, I'll fix it for you." She was apprehensive but agrees, and then he took the opportunity, you can only imagine, to assault her once again. He makes small talk, and then he gets handsy, which began with him touching like her knee, and then he leaned further in saying, "I could protect you if you would let me." And he proceeds to put his hands under her blouse, down her skirt, and assaults her for a second time. Now, as she struggles to get away, he pushes her down, and then, this whole little scene ensues. Now, after she does get free, she runs out of school, she goes towards home. Now, just as the physical abuse in the SA escalated, so did the spiritual, okay? At 16, Jane Doe number 2 remembers being called into Miller Sr.'s office, where both he and JP would relentlessly berate her for bringing a Harry Potter book to campus. They called her a servant of Satan. They told her she'd be arred violently by demons if she continued down this path, okay? Then in front of her, they set the book on fire, after which Miller Sr. beat her with a Bible and poured water over her head. Okay. The plaintiff is rightfully claiming that the Millers and their various religious entities had a responsibility to protect all minors within their church and educational institutions. Now, the suit explains the abysmal ways they failed countless minors year after year. These failures, for one, directly violate every law of human decency, okay? And secondly, it is a violation of South Carolina law, which states, and I'll quote, "When an entity becomes aware or should reasonably be aware of the danger, it has a duty to take action to prevent harm to those under its care." Defendants were in a unique position of authority and control over the church environment. They're informed and believe both Millers had long-standing knowledge of SA misconduct, emotional abuse, and exploitation of minors within their church community long before these incidents alleged in the complaints. Now, let me tell you one thing, okay? Jane Doe number 1 and number 2, y'all, they brought the receipts, okay? This is in the form of affidavits from JP and Wayne Miller's respective ex-spouse, Allison Williams. That's JP ex's. Now, in her 2024 lawsuit, she said that John Paul confessed about his inappropriate contact with several underage females from the church. Imagine that. He blames his actions on the SA he experienced in childhood, allegedly at the hands of his father. Now, she indicated that church leadership was aware of the allegations of SA misconduct by John Paul and required him to enroll in S-addiction rehabilitation program, okay? Which, according to Williams, he failed to complete. I can't imagine. Now, in the suit, she accused church leadership of suppressing the allegations against John Paul and silencing the victims. The church failed to investigate and continued to allow JP unfettered access to young young congregates. Now, in essence, they simply gave this reprehensible behavior the green light to continue. Now, Susan Miller, Wayne Miller's ex, in her 2007 sworn testimony, she explains in grave detail how her ex-husband both physically and emotionally abused his family. Susan Miller's testimony asserted that Reginald Wayne Miller had an obsession with power and control that extended beyond his immediate family and into the church, where he engaged in inappropriate relationships with young men and young women, many of whom were vulnerable members of the congregation. Now, in 1989, Myrtle Beach's local ABC affiliate, WPDE, they aired a 5-part story about Miller Sr., in where several young men from his congregation appeared with blurred faces and disguised voices. Now, they shared stories of how he tried making advances towards them, and she found this jarring and immediately became fearful for my children and myself, she would say. Now, it also tells of Miller Sr.'s 2006 arrest for attempting to solicitate a lady of the evening, let's say, in a city park. And in spite of the overwhelming evidence of prior misconduct against John Paul and Reginald Wayne, the pair continued to operate their churches without meaningful oversight, failing to implement or enforce policies to protect minors from exploitation. Now, as in so many of these cases we see, a failure to act and condemn is really nothing more than silently condoning the inappropriate actions of another. In a pattern we see time and again, ignoring one offense only makes room for a second. And so on, okay? Obviously becomes much worse. Now, in this case, the church's leadership's failure to take corrective action regarding John Paul Miller's known predatory behavior and their continued allowance of Wayne Miller to lead a church, despite all the past allegations, fostered a culture of complicity. It allowed for an environment where misconduct was tolerated that only seemed to empower the abuser. Now, it's going to certainly be interesting to see if more suits are filed or if this is like the end of this, right, for the Millers. I mean, we're just going to have to kind of wait and see on that. Looking into this case, like from where we learned about it with, Mica and where we're still at with that, all the way to this, it blows my mind that these men were able to and continue to get away with this stuff year after year after year after year. And I'm honestly surprised that a situation like Mica didn't occur any sooner. And I'm still just dumbfounded how no charges were brought up against this man for that. So, that being said, if you're still watching, I greatly appreciate it. If you could drop some little sofas off in the comment section and let me know what you think about everything down in the comment section. Now, while you're down there, like I said, drop those little sofas off for myself, Rosco and Spirit, Bo and Luke, and the rest of the squad. Good Lord, we need a place to sit too. And then we'll meander our way on down there into the comment section and do all that. And until we do all that, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Rosco on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hey, welcome to the Sofa Squad. Sipping from the cup that hey, come laugh with the Sofa Squad. Can't roll my damn eyes hard enough.